Welcome to The Whole Pineapple. I'm Ruby Boris.
And I'm Ann Judge. The Whole Pineapple is a podcast about wellness focused around fertility. We'll talk with experts on a wide range of topics, including nutrition, stress relief, sleep, mental health, etc.
And we'll dig into the issues that can cause fertility challenges, like PCOS, or early menopause, or cancer treatment.
So if you're curious about your fertility, whether you're ready to start a family,
or you're preserving your options for the future, let's dig in.
Hey, everybody. I don't have a semi-eloquent, quasi-entertaining intro today.
You don't have anything ready? I was looking forward to your infertility jokes. So,
I think I'm just really excited to talk to our guest today, and I'm kind of in a slap-happy mood, so I think that's appropriate. I was listening to Flight of the Conchords in between patients this morning, so I think that's fitting. Anne, do you want to tell everybody what we're doing today?
Yeah, we're kind of talking about humor. And unlike you, I did Google infertility joke just beforehand to find out what would come up. So I liked this one. So why did the REI cross the road?
Oh, boy. Why?
Because there's an affluent, infertile woman in her 30s on the other side.
Oh, no.
But the second thing that came up on a Google search for it was an article written by our guest today. So I am so excited that when you search infertility and humor, we are talking to one of your first search hits. So if you want to go ahead and intro.
Yes, look at that top of the Google page. Yes, so we are talking to Meirav Zur today. She is a creative artist in the performing arts. She is an actor, producer, writer, and director with a passion for improv, theater, film, and the art of comedy. In 2005, she founded English on Stage, the English language professional traveling theater in Israel, where she wrote, directed, and performed in various original productions and developed and coached unique theater education programs for children and adults. Among her many stage productions is Inconceivable, the totally true one-woman semi-fertile quasi-musical, a one-woman comedic show depicting a hilarious and honest look at the complexity of modern fertility. Isn't that the truth? Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a hard topic to laugh about, but I feel like with anything hard, like to survive it, you almost have to have that sense, because otherwise you can't just sit in your room crying all the time.
Partly that, and partly because the whole experience of fertility and infertility is so surreal and absurd that when you step out of it for a second and look, it's quite funny.
Yeah. Absurd is a very good way of describing it, actually. And I think we kind of developed that kind of humor working in this field for a while, too. Anne, how did it feel when you were in it? Did you have any sort of humor when you were going through your process?
Yeah, I mean, we had kind of dark humor. You're kind of mocking the situation because that gives you back a little bit of power and control over it. And I also think of the whole quote about that, comedy is tragedy plus time. Like when I was in it, things that did not seem, funny at all, it seemed really tragic. Like you can see after some time goes by a little bit more that absurdity of it and be like, wow, that was really an ironic situation to be in. So I think it's a very different experience in the midst of treatment versus the way that you look back on it after.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've never laughed so hard as in Nick's episode. So,
oh, thank you.
He is quite entertaining.
Well, Meriav, tell us a little bit about your, kind of personal journey. How did this happen for you? And then how did you end up, making so much of your professional self merging with this really hard experience?
At first it was not merged or near at all. Yeah. I was, professionally day-to-day creating and producing and performing and all these different, projects and productions, mostly through the theater that I founded that I was running. And I was doing that, all the time, but it was all, fun and creative stuff, nothing related to my personal life. Of course, I was a bunch of other characters and working with many different people and artists, and it was just, that. But in parallel to that, in my personal life, I was going through infertility, the fun kind, unexplained infertility, and unexplained secondary infertility. And yeah, that was insane, but I wasn't talking about it with anyone. I made my husband not talk about it with anyone because clearly we were the only ones going through it. So I didn't want anyone else pitying us or questioning or whatever. Like, I didn't want to deal with it at all. So I just, basically created this little covert spy bubble. And it was just such a horrible mistake in retrospect, of course. But back then I was like, no, this is how it's going to be.
I feel like some people also, like, you assume that you're about to be done, right? Yeah. Well, but next month I'll be pregnant. So why do I want to tell everybody and worry everybody and have to have all these hard conversations?
Exactly. And that's how we were, just going about our daily lives. And then a few years ago, we had gone through yet another miscarriage. And this one was a big one because it was like, I found out I was pregnant by sheer chance. And then, we heard the heartbeat, and then we heard there was no heartbeat. And then we had, the DNC, and all that was like within a span of about 2 weeks because I found out rather late and everything. And so that was like the most, craziest roller coaster ever. And at that point, I was like, why was I not talking about this, at least with my close friends? Like, I'm in like such a weird place now. And I felt, I guess, ready to talk about it. And then I just didn't know how to talk about it because I had already put myself in this position where it's been so long and no one knew really. And so now what? What am I going to do? Take each friend separately on like a coffee date and tell them and make sure they don't talk to the other person before I tell? Like, how's that going to work? I was like, this is too complicated. I don't know what to do.
Have a press conference.
So you thought it sounded easier to do a one-woman show?
Well, no, I also didn't know how. Like, even if I did have it all set up with, one-on-ones, I didn't know how would I tell them this whole long story without having it so tragic and long and weird and, So I just literally gathered them in my house one day for an evening. I created like a group text and I was like, hey, come over for, I think I called it like hormones and cookies or whatever it was. And they came over. They're, amazing friends of mine who indulged me and they knew, that I was doing theater all the time. They're like, oh, they didn't know what it was, but they're like, sure, And they came over and I sat there and explained to them everything that had gone on pretty much the last few years, but I did it not like through storytelling proper. It was through like silly songs and weird jokes and funny props and characters and all this. And I really thought that was it. But afterwards, it got them talking about stuff that they had experienced. And it really got me wondering what's going on. And that was that. I mean, they were like, you have to make this one of your shows. And that's pretty much what happened.
How did you feel before, like that first night? Were you really nervous? Did it feel like a sense of relief? Or
I was very nervous, and I remember I set up my living room kind of like it was just a bunch of chairs, and then on the one wall was me, and I thought I would do like some of the stuff standing up, but most of the time I remember I was sitting down clutching the paper that I had that I was kind of reading from, and I guess somehow I was able to perform through that, and then that's it. I was done. I went to the door. I was like, thank you. I walked to the door and I opened it and I wanted them to just file out and we'll never have to talk about it again. Now they know, whatever. But they wouldn't leave. I was like, what's going on? Yeah. And that really got me kind of curious. I'm like, if we're a bunch of friends who don't really know all these details about each other, like we knew little bits, but we didn't know, how many other groups of women are there that don't really know, all these details? And my friends were like, you have to make this one of your shows. It'll be awesome. And I said, no one will come to this. They don't know me. No one cares about, vaginas and reproductive issues. Well, maybe vaginas, but not reproductive issues. But I worked on it for about a year and then I premiered it knowing full on it was going to be a one night only event, but it didn't because the response from then was, it was more than I expected for sure.
Did you feel at all nervous about keeping it going? I mean, if you thought you were just going to be doing this once and then once again, so.
I thought I was going to be doing it once, and even then, I knew my friends that came to that night came again to that show, and I had other people that I kind of knew, but most of the people I didn't know, and it was freaking me out, because I was like, this is the first look they get of me, this is what they learn from me. Is this. Yeah. It's not the same as, hey, nice to meet you. It's like, hey, check out all my issues,
Well, also, like, if you're in the fertility clinic, the first time you meet me, you're like half naked. So
exactly.
You're like, hi.
But, but that's different because I guess there's kind of like you either don't see each other again or you do, but only for that.
Oh, yeah, separated.
And it's weird. It's just like, it's this weird thing. But I'm nervous to this day. Like a bit before the show, I'm still like, I don't have to do this. Why am I don't have to go out there. But I'm like, okay, well, everyone's here. And then I do it. Like the second I go on, it's okay. And, there's that rapport with the audience and there's that energy and it's awesome. But yeah, it's still personal.
Yeah, it's a vulnerable place for sure. And it's such a good example of just the infertility journey in itself of you feel like you're alone and on the quote unquote outside world, you have to put on this face, right? And then in the background, you have all this other stuff that's happening. So you're basically trying to bring it together.
It is totally that. I mean, the show has brought me so much joy and therapy and knowledge and amusement and like all this stuff that I really didn't expect.
How many times have you done this now? Like how many productions have you?
I haven't counted, but I have done many. I mean, I premiered this towards the end of 2017. So
wow.
The pandemic, of course, I didn't perform as much. I did a few virtual shows, but it's been numerous shows and it still kind of feels, new each time.
Does it always feel as personal each time? Like at some point, do you feel like you're suddenly playing a character or do you always still feel yourself?
It's still like, oh my gosh, people now know all this stuff about me.
Which is why I'm sure people connect with it because they can see that, it is real. So
yeah, obviously it's a show with a bunch of jokes and things like that. And when I hear the laughs, I know, I mean, there are laughs I can even recognize now, the laughs of the people that relate and the laughs of the people that are like, wait, should I be laughing? But it's so funny, but I don't know. And
it's probably a much more awkward laugh from some people.
Yeah, but there's a lot of like good, hearty laugh. Like most of the laughs are like, and I don't know who's there in the audience each time, but I'm like, oh, there's someone that's like me. Or, like you immediately connect with that. It's like, hey, we got that in common. There's that whole thing with infertility. It's like when you talk to someone who's gone through that, there's that immediate connection of like, what I'm talking about.
I've read that it's kind of interactive. How does that work?
So I love improvisation, and this was my first solo show ever. So that was daunting to me.
So many things to be nervous about.
So many things. Yeah, professionally and personally, this was insane. I have no idea. It's like everyone's like, "Oh, it's so it's so great." I'm like, is it smart? Is it insane? I don't know. It's a fine line. Because it was my first solo show, I was very nervous about that as well. And so I was like, "Oh, but if I can involve the audience, then I'm even less, doing it by myself in a way, because even in a solo show, the audience is kind of part of it. But when it's interactive, it's even more. And I'm like, why not involve them? And that's also kind of like the underlying thing of infertility. It's like you're by yourself, but you're not. You're doing things on your own, but you're doing with others. And it's like that whole, juxtaposition of things that I thought was interesting to also incorporate in the play. So I have anything from like kind of talking with the audience and getting them, to answer some questions, or I have some that come up on stage. Like it's different parts each time. It's interesting. I don't want to say too much because I think some people fear that as an audience. They're like, I don't want her to pick on
Don't pick me. Don't pick me.
Yeah, it's not that kind of, forced thing.
Yeah, my husband and I were at a Cirque du Soleil show once where he was the audience when they pulled up and jumped a bike over, and he's still like traumatized. And so every performance, I'm always like, are they going to pick you for something? So yeah,
he's got that face.
He does. Yeah, it's very much. And I think that's why he has that very much like, don't pick me face. And those are the people that they always gravitate towards.
Oh my gosh. One thing that I've noticed, I am very jealous of your ability to do accents. Like it is something that I strive for. Whenever I'm like trying to tell a story or I'm like reading stories to somebody like with characters, like I try to like throw different accents in there. I can do Boston. I can do Brooklyn.
Nice.
I can do like multiple dialects in the English.
You're saying these. You're going to have to prove it now.
I'm not doing it. I refuse. We will alienate all of our life. I won't do it.
You're doing your own Bostonian and your own Brooklyn. Yeah.
It's Ruby in Boston. It's Ruby in Brooklyn. It's Ruby in the UK. But I cannot get Australian. It is so hard.
I'm very flattered that, for your compliment, but honestly, I don't do all the accents. I can't. I can. It'll just be very entertaining because it's completely off. But I do several, and I do enjoy doing like character voices more than accents because I think accent is like a particular way. And if I don't get it right, then it, but with a character, you have so much kind of creative freedom with that. So children's story time is always, always one thing.
Yeah, I always somehow gravitate back to an English accent when I try Australian. It just always goes back there. I'm like, that's not it.
That is the origin. So yeah.
Yeah.
How different is the show you're doing now from 2017? How much have you adjusted?
That's a great question. A lot.
Yeah.
First of all, the nature of theatrical shows is constant evolution. And I don't know if most shows do as much as they could or should, but it's just a natural way. And I really believe that, even from like most of the shows that I've worked with were original shows anyway. So even from the script to the stage, there's this evolution, and it's a process. There are things that happen when you're putting words, to life, that you're like, oh, wait, that works, or that works better, or that doesn't work. And that changes already. So even from, when I was working on this show, even from when I had it in my head to words on the page to practicing it and getting it to the stage, that already went through many changes. And then since the premiere, there are just many things like a typical audience wouldn't really think, wouldn't understand why or think it was anything bad or good or whatever. But for me, it's like, if I look back on the, the first ones, I'm like, oh, it's so cringy. Like I do that so much different, or that I'm glad, we changed or too, whatever. So yeah, but there are some things that I've, added, taken away, changed.
And what's the overall mood that you want the audience to walk away after your show? Like, it's probably different than how your friends felt the first night, or maybe it's not. Do you feel that a lot of people linger and are kind of like talking to each other and sharing their stories?
Yeah. I know it. I also hear it sometimes. And I often go out to the audience as soon as I can. I usually have to, I bow, I go backstage. I kind of have to like compose myself, because it's like this whole thing that I just unloaded. And when I get myself together, I usually go to the audience. Like I go off stage and talk to people, and it's great. Like I love meeting people that connect with it in whatever way. And I've had such a crazy gamut of, how people connect to the show.
What's something that someone said to you that surprised you?
I had, at the beginning, it was like, this is exactly what I've gone through, or this is exactly what my sister has gone through, but I didn't really know what it meant. Or our daughter's been going through this for the past few months, and we didn't really know that this is what. I've heard even from medical professionals that were like, oh, we never really looked at it that way, and things like that. But I had someone that came up and said, this is what my mother went through when she had me. And that was like, oh my God, we're there. Like we're already there. Because people are already at that point. The infertility and IVF babies are now learning about what their parents had gone through. Things like that make me really kind of appreciate the process even more.
I do feel like that's part of the reason that, there is at least more of a conversation about it now, because infertility has always existed. It's just, if you went back 70 years ago, people would just, have that aunt that never had kids, and we don't ask her about it. Or it was one of those things where people, when there wasn't as much to offer in terms of treatment or even testing, people were just kind of tried until they felt like they couldn't try anymore.
Yeah.
All the way back to antiquity, they have documented fertility treatment kind of things. So it's not new.
The success of our treatment is definitely much better.
Right. And also the options available, which I think, and also the fact that you have someone to go to. I think a lot of people also didn't go to anyone or didn't say anything because people didn't know, and they didn't know any better. And also, though, I have to say, to this day, we're still misinformed about things or lack of information. For me also, that was the biggest deal in terms of, what was going on with me. And I wasn't talking about it because I grew up in the American public school system. So I was basically told that I have to do everything in my power to avoid getting pregnant, because just by walking past the opposite sex, it was going to happen. Like, basically, that's what it was. So when it wasn't working, it didn't make sense. It was like this, weird math problem that wasn't making sense. And you're like, but that's not what I know.
Yeah, we have a long ways to go when it comes to understanding reproductive health and teaching about reproductive health and your own body. Because I get that expressed a lot from patients. It's like, I wish I knew this. Like, how am I just now knowing this?
Yeah. And you feel completely like, okay, it's one thing not to know about, nuclear physics or space or things like that. But this is the body that you're living in. You don't really know what's happening, or at least you don't really know how to use it to get the, result that you're going for. Like, how is that possible?
Yeah, you need like the little care and feeding of you owner's manual that you get when you get a car, that you need a little more explanation.
Exactly. We don't get a user's manual for, parenthood. So I guess we're like, so we don't need the user's manual to become parents. Like, let's just add that together. But it's so not. There's so much that we could know, or at least where to turn to find these resources, which also I think people aren't aware of. But I think now it's becoming a bit more accessible, which is great.
So what are the key educational points you want people to get from your show?
I think the main one, and I say this also on my show, is that everybody's got baggage and everybody's got, their own issues. Nobody in the world is, there's no such thing as perfect. Nobody in the world has it great. And whatever, you see the other person is not, you don't see the full thing. It's like the exact, a social media thing. Whatever you're seeing is not the entire picture. And I think because everyone's going through something, people should just understand that. And I think that, it could help you just be a bit, just be nice and tolerant and accepting, because everyone's got their thing. That's the biggest thing. And also, you're not alone, which I think is, the irony of like me doing, a solo show about this, but I found so many of these little, nuggets of things that I learned. But yeah, finding out that you're not alone in this, and there are people that have had the exact same experience as you, or very similar or complementary experiences. I think that's so helpful to just be like, oh, wow. It's like takes a load off, and just be like, okay, I do have people that I can connect with, and we speak the same language in a way.
Completely. I mean, that's why I'm such a big proponent of people when they're going through this, being part of a support group, because you don't know how good that feels until you're in a room of other people and you say something and everyone else just gets it, and you don't have to like explain it. It's just like, yes. You mentioned that, oh, I just found out my third friend is pregnant. And instead of people being like, wee, it was like, oh, I'm sad. And it's just that beat of just knowing that you're understood is like the best feeling when you've been often keeping everything to yourself for a long time, which I think is most people's first reaction.
Yeah, a lot of times you think like, I don't need that. I don't need that. It's fine.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. I would like to take that a step further and have it, I would like an official request out there in the universe for it to be a mandatory part of the protocol. Because when I was, at one point when I was at my fertility doctor's, he was like, they have these support groups. If you want, like, I don't know what they are. Like, if you want. And I was like, support group? No, I'm not going to go to that. Like, that's not me. I don't need that. I'm good. And I was not. Like, I needed to go to that. So I think just like you have to take, your, stims, or you have to go every, 3 days to get yourself poked and prodded, you can go to this group. Like, this is a mandatory thing. It would just be so helpful, because I think the mental health aspect of infertility is so underserved and, not so much even acknowledged as it should be.
I'm presenting on stress and fertility at our upcoming symposium, and there are a lot of studies that are like, let's try this out and see if this is just part of your IVF protocol, is you have to do these certain like virtual visits or this mind-body kind of stuff. And it makes a difference, not only for like how people feel, but potentially pregnancy rates.
Totally. I mean, it's also a biological thing, and also comedy. I mean, there's this whole serotonin effect. I mean, I don't want to, this has not yet been a medical study, but of people that I know that have seen my show, 3 have gotten pregnant after seeing my show. And it's really not a study, but I knew like of some people that had some sort of, issues for years, whatever. And then like a little bit after my show, like I heard they were pregnant, or, they told me or whatever. And I'm like, I'm not taking credit for that, but I hope that is part of the thing that you did to get yourself, a bit more, serotonin and all that good stuff. But
I mean, there's research on the health benefits of laughter and like, smiling, even when you don't feel like smiling, but then you get annoyed at yourself. And so to be able to find genuine humor somewhere, it's huge. And it can be so hard to do when you just don't feel that way.
Totally. And I think having a good kind of comedic support plan, like whether it's, you know, a funny friend that can like be with you and like, you know, make fun of stuff with you, or if you have like a list of, you know, your go-to funny movies or TV shows or whatever, that you could just, you know, disconnect and laugh and smile and whatever. It does so good. So
it's funny too, because the title of my presentation is Just Relax, because you know how everybody loves to hear that too.
I talk about it in my show too. Relax, my nemesis word.
Or just, you know, just stop thinking about it. It'll happen. It's like, oh yeah, how does one do that? Tell me.
Yeah. And I'm glad, like, it's so refreshing to speak with people like you that also see the other side, like yet another side of lives of these people that like on a day-to-day, there's something about that you understand. And so there are things that I'm sure, you know, you wouldn't even, that's not even in your language to say to them, because you know what that means deep down. Like, why would you say relax? Like, you know?
Well, just that support aspect. I mean, working here, you see all these people, and yeah, you wish you could just like find everybody a buddy, you know, when someone's telling you about how they just feel so alone because they don't know anyone else that's going through this experience. And you're just like, I've seen 3 people in similar circumstances, and I feel like you two would get along, but I can't matchmake you.
I think you just invented something ingenious.
Yeah, like fertility match, find a friend or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, because sometimes I will have people that I see like back to back, and they're like, clearly they probably sat in the waiting room next to each other. I'm like, oh, you guys, like, I think you would really get along.
Because they don't talk.
No.
We don't talk in the waiting room. What's up with that rule that still happens is like, why are we not talking? We're here for the same thing. We're gonna both get our, you know, nether regions checked. We're both going to get poked here. We're here. Let's talk. No one. It's like, I'm not even here. I'm on my phone.
That's kind of a cool, like, psych experiment. Like, whatever you do, like, pretend to be a patient, go on in and just turn and be like, so, are you looking forward to the wand today? Or, like, whatever you want to say to, like, break the ice.
I think I should, but I would probably get arrested and be like, oh, that crazy woman's harassing our patients again. She's not even our patient. What is she waiting for?
You need the right opening line. You need something to like break the ice, but not scare them. And that's a fine line.
It is. It's a total fine line. And also I get it that some people are like, you know, they're putting themselves in like a zone, you know, they're like, I'm in and out. I'm going in, I'm going out. I don't want to talk about it. I'm going for my day. I get that. But I think you should totally put out maybe like, I don't know, like a little basket and then like, you know, numbers or whatever. And then people could just like, I don't know, they should totally like have a buddy.
I know they have like different social media groups out there, because I've had a patient tell me, they're like, oh, people talk about you on Facebook. I'm like, oh no.
That's awesome.
And they're like, no, it's all good things. I'm like, I hope so.
Oh, I don't want to think about that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I think actually the advanced situation of the social media infertility, I mean, I didn't even have that when I was deep in. I think that's amazing. The fact that you can connect. I know on Instagram, it's really strong. A lot of people even open, you know, fictitious or anonymous accounts. It's just a great way for them to vent and then connect with other people who are also like, they don't want to talk about it publicly, but they do need to kind of get it out there and support each other and vent and whatever. And that's such a great platform for that. So yeah, it's so great that people have that option.
Well, it's so good to have some sort of more realistic portrayals too, because I think that's one of the hard things. Like the only news that's often out there is celebrity, which is not realistic. I don't know if you saw like just a few days ago, there was the news story about Paris Hilton. Did you see that, Ruby?
I haven't yet.
She announced that, so she's done IVF 7 times. She's got 20 embryos banked, but they're all boys, and she really wants a girl, so she's still moving forward. Yeah, I think I may be mixing up the boy versus the girl, but yeah, they just had their first child through a surrogate, but they're continuing to bank more embryos because of, I mean, and this is what's out there. This is what people think IVF is, and it's so not at all related to what most people's experience is going to be.
Yeah, I think mainly the fact of, IVF not working the first time is a big shocker for many people. I think they're like, you know, the celebrities come out and say, oh, I've done IVF and here I am. First of all, especially in the US, that just the cost is something that people can't even, live up to. And then, the actual going about it and the failed cycles, and all of that, I think people are not aware of that.
Yeah, a lot of people, the big hurdle is like, well, would we ever do IVF or not? And then there's kind of this assumption, well, okay, if we decide to do it, at least it's going to work. And even in those best prognosis situations, like it's very common for it to not work, especially the first time. So
yeah, we took the leap. We did it. We finally did IVF. Why didn't it work?
Yeah, and that happened to me. IVF was kind of like, that last stronghold that we didn't go yet because, well, also it dealt with so much. There's so much to make that decision. And then when that first cycle didn't work, and it was insane the toll that it took, just that one cycle. And my husband was like, well, they do say that the first cycle doesn't work. We should try for another one. I'm like, ah. And that's where I stopped. For many people, it's like, do I even admit that I stopped after one cycle? Is that giving up? Is that not a winner mentality? Is that, it's not like it that eats away at you also. But for me, we were at a point where it was like, are we going to keep going literally at all costs? The slight chance and maybe not even possibility of our daughter having a sibling, but most likely she won't have a functional family, or will we stop where we are and focus on our family? And at least, most likely our daughter will not have a sibling, but she will have at least a functional family and supportive parents and all that, and, that are with each other or not. That's where we were to make that decision. And later we heard of all these stories of people that had gone through IVF and, powered through, and they've gone through multiple cycles and they finally have a child and then they go through divorce, which, a lot of people don't understand, but it's so clear to me. I mean, it takes such a toll on, your relationship. And so, yeah, that's a conversation that also needs to be had.
Now, I'm glad you bring up the secondary infertility piece, because that's something we're going to focus on in a later episode too, because I do feel like people's calculus is so different, because you are having to think about, the resources and emotional, definitely as much as the financial for the child that you have. And I feel like when people haven't had a child, I mean, again, like I think a lot of people are like, I will do whatever it takes. Like if this is my goal, I'm going to keep going till I get there. But that for many people is a different conversation when you're looking at doing it again.
I mean, for me, it was like, that's the, the thing, like IVF, but I think there are a lot of other options today that are more possible and, they're doable more than I think when I was deep in it. So those options are great to have because your discussion is a bit wider on your options. I do think part of the big discussion for secondary infertility, and I'll leave that for you to ask on your next interview, but I think that it's an important conversation to have. I think people that are going through secondary infertility, like with me, and I think that was also part of why I didn't talk about it, because you feel like you're in this no man's land, because you're like, how dare you speak about infertility? You already have a child. But then you're also not really able to expand your family. And am I not allowed to do that? Like, so you kind of feel in this place like, how dare you? How not dare you? And it should not happen. Like, really, leave people alone.
It reminds me kind of like the stay at home versus daycare versus like every parenting decision it's
exactly. It's exactly that. It's like, how can you judge, because there's so many factors for each and every, story case or whatever. So like, there's no way to put like a whole, generic label on it.
Well, we talked a little bit about celebrities, but like, what have you seen like in the industry when it comes to infertility? Do people talk about it? I know Anne and I have our thoughts on how it's portrayed a lot of times. So.
Right. I think years ago, there were in the media, TV, film, and also within, celebrities' personal lives that are out there. I think it was touched upon years ago. I think more recently, you see it more within the storylines of certain projects on film, but I don't think that it's still yet the complete story. There have been a few.
Yeah, I can't decide if it's better or worse when they like dabble it in or they touch on it, but
Right.
They don't portray it realistically. It's like, it's almost worse than not mentioning it at all.
Right. But I guess it's kind of like, the kiss and sex on screen, right? Like you have to make it look good on camera. You change the angles, you change the story kind of, you change, and so it's going to be different than the real experience. And I think only the people that know. It's like, I think when you're like a little kid and you look at, or younger, not too little, but when you see like, a kiss on screen, it's not the same thing when you've never been kissed. It's not the same thing as after you've experienced it. And you're like, well, it's not really like that. Or your first kiss is not real. I think it's kind of like that. It's when you have that kind of thing, we want it realistic, but we also have to make it appealing. And I guess there is that debate creatively. I do think it's not the complete story in any case on most projects.
It makes me think of TV show House was on like as my husband transitioned like before med school, during med school residency kind of thing. And his like ability to be like, we don't do that. No. Like,
right.
Throughout, it got like more frequent the farther along he got in it. He's like, no.
So he got a lot more annoying to watch House with.
Totally. He's just like, yeah, no, I can't watch this anymore. That's just not how it works.
Right. Which I guess is okay, because then you're like, you know what you're doing, because you know that this is not what you're doing. I mean, I like that it's in, storylines more, that we see that more. But I think also that's what I talk about, for people that haven't seen the show. I'm like, yeah, you've heard about it for sure. You've heard the buzzwords, IVF, infertility, whatever, clinics. But you don't really know what that means on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute, for people. And I think that is what is, the thing that people are missing from, getting the whole thing. And there are some projects that I've seen that have pretty much tried in an hour or two or however much to show the real thing. But it's so dramatic and tragic that most people can't even watch it.
It's hard to like tie it up in a nice little bow at the end kind of movie, or film.
That was for me always the hard part when I was going through, whenever a TV show or something would introduce the infertility storyline, I would get so mad because I'm like, great, it's going to be like a happy ending 2 episodes from now. And then you just feel worse about yourself.
I personally couldn't watch the ones that had some sort of infertility plot line in it, but it was tragic. Like I couldn't, if it wasn't leading into more detail and let's see this out, if it was just touching on it, it was usually like tragic and it would just trigger, and I'm like, I can't watch this. Like there are some movies that I've seen, I will never watch again. Like, on the other hand, there are lots of, comedies that what I call infertility clean. Like there's no talk of pregnancy, infertility or anything. It's just pure, comedy about something entirely different and they don't touch upon.
That is another great website idea. It's like that whole Does the Dog Die website. It's like is there infertility? What is a pregnancy clean movie for me? So
yeah, I've actually published a list of recommended, I think it was movies or TV shows or both that don't have any, because I've seen them. So they don't have any. So I'm like, these are foolproof,
That is, we definitely will link to that. Because that's the thing, like you want sometimes to just have like escapism and laugh. You're like, let me sit down and watch this. And then, 2/3 of the way through this, like what in the plot of the story, maybe even just like a throwaway scene or line, but it can like put you back in a hard place.
Why did they put that in there?
Yeah. That's such a good idea. It does just incidentally and sometimes for no purpose just show up out of the blue.
Totally. It's like, do you know of a Common Sense Media?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So it's like Common Sense Media for fertility. Fertility Sense Media. Yeah. That's what it should be. I think it should be yet another check mark in their thing.
Oh my God.
Do you have other resources that you like to give people now that everybody comes to you with all their infertility questions and stories?
Well, they don't. But, and I'm also very, I'm very scarred by the tactless, unsolicited advice that I've gotten over the years. So I don't want to be that. I like to connect whenever I can with fertility practitioners and people that are in that space that are safe. When I was going through, if I would be like, I want to do some, maybe I can do like, I don't know, some yoga or something, but who really knows what I'm going through? And so I won't do anything wrong, whatever. That I would love to know. So like I connect with, the people that I've connected with, and I'm like, if anyone asks or if I, share their stuff, it's like I like to align with people that I'm like, this is the person that I would have wanted.
I feel like that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. I want to be someone's like cool older sister, or at this point I guess I'm the cool aunt.
You're my cool older sister, aunt.
Yeah, like back in the day, that's why all my TV shows.
I think you are. I hope that you are aware of the power, in a good sense, that you have on a day-to-day of the people that you see in and out. Like, I was thinking after we first met and before today of like, it's just that smile that you see that day, or that little sentence that you'll say, or even like, you know, holding someone's hand or giving a hug. Like those are the little things of the few that I have had that were like, you know, human that I've loved. That's what I remember. I don't even remember some names of these people, but I remember that. And I think that is huge. That thing can like change a person's day, week, life. Like, you know, that's everything. I mean, I applaud you for just where you're doing on a day to day.
Well, and for you too. I think there is something so important about sharing our personal experiences because it seems so real. Like I still remember, again, this is so forever ago, we were having all of our meetings in individual rooms and consults in person, not by Zoom. And I was meeting with my nurse at the clinic before I worked here, talking about, you know, getting set up for another IVF cycle. And it hadn't occurred to me that I would have to do IVF more than once. Again, it's this, once you decide to do it on paper, we were a really good prognosis situation. And I just didn't know. I wasn't working here at that time. And I remember being annoyed and kind of only half listening during the first visit because I was so distracted by the fact that she had a photo on her desk of like a bunch of kids and herself. I just remember thinking like, what do you know about any of this you're telling me? And then she probably saw me glaring and she's like, oh yeah, it took me, 3 rounds of IVF before I had so-and-so. And it just that moment, it's like, oh, like you're a real person and this is something that happened to you too. And that probably was more important to me in terms of realizing that I could do this again than anything my doctor said about stats or, options. So I think that's why I try to balance not doing a ton of personal disclosure, but especially when I'm in an individual situation with someone where I feel like it might be helpful. I think it's really good to be people, not just, medical professionals.
Yeah, I think if someone knows that, and I know that maybe, I don't know actually, but I don't know if you do this and see if you have an opportunity and then chime in. But I think if someone knew that you had what to chime in with, even before saying anything, that's beyond, I think people like that. Some people don't, but I think they're like, okay, you get it. And also I think people that see medical professionals within the fertility space on a day-to-day don't always understand that they do see a lot of people every day. I think that's also a thing. It's like, it's just you. You're the only one going through it. This is the first person that this person saw. It's not that. But I think that's the feeling. And I think understanding that you're okay, you're in good hands. You're not, the very first person who's gone through this. I think that's huge.
And you probably think this too, but have you ever sat and thought how many patients you've actually interacted with in your whole entire career, even when I was in the hospital, who probably remember you? And it makes me happy but also terrifies me at the same time because I didn't get it right every time. I know I can think of off the top of my head several times where I'm like, I could have phrased that much better, but now it's out of my mouth.
Right. But I think you understanding that now, you probably didn't understand that then, but I think that's part of it. It's like, oh, okay, I get that now. And then you're kind of evolved a bit and you're like, okay, now I know what to do here. It's part of it, obviously. It's also people that are on the other side, like patients who are just starting out. They have no clue what's going on. But then later they're like, oh, wait, maybe I should ask this question. Maybe I should,
Yeah, there are definitely things that when I first started here that I learned right away that I'm like, okay, don't say things that way. That's, it's much easier to say it this way. Or, this is how you explain it and people tend to understand it better and things like that. So, yeah.
And that's great that you do that and have that space because it's so important. There's so much going on with this one, each person. It's like it's an entire world.
Well, I know we won't have time for the snack. Is there anything else, Ruby or Meirav, anything else you think we should bring up now? Do you want to plug? Where can we see your show? What's going on?
I have recently started going back to in-person performances, which is great. I'm now based in LA and I started in person a few months ago. So I have my next round of shows that I'm finalizing shortly. So I guess my website is the best way to keep up with whenever, those dates come out. And that's at www.meiravzur.com, meiravzur.com. And you can see about the show, which is Inconceivable, and other silly stuff that I've done, or social media, which I'm more active on my socials for the show, which is at Inconceivable Show on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and on Twitter, it's Inconceivable because it was too long.
Yes. Yeah, I think we are whole pineapple, like had to condense it.
Well, Inconceivable is always such a good title too, because I always think of Princess Bride and the whole like, I don't think that word means what you think it means, because that's sort of how you feel when you're in the moment too. Like, none of this is what I thought it was gonna be.
It's totally that. I mean, for me, it was perfect. First of all, because I mean, Princess Bride is like, it's a classic, but I think, you know, the double entendre of that, and also the whole journey of the show, which was inconceivable, and like the things that have happened are beyond what I've even imagined. Like, you know, all of this, even meeting you both, it's like, you know, it's all,
you're pretty famous, you know, that makes sense. In Slovakia, we have been in the top 50 for like a couple weeks now on our trip. So.
Well deserved.
Well, we so appreciate you coming to spend time with us. I know you've got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love speaking with you, and I'm fangirling over what you do every day.
It's awesome. And I think we need to have a trip down to LA to watch when these shows are ready. So
definitely.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Whole Pineapple Podcast. We hope it was helpful.
If you know someone who could benefit from hearing the podcast, we hope you'll share it with them.
And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review The Whole Pineapple on your favorite podcast app. Every rating and review makes us easier to find.
This podcast is sponsored by Seattle Reproductive Medicine and is produced by Audiotocracy Podcast Production. We'll see you next time. Have a delicious week.